Now let us move to the second category, concupiscence. And concupiscence, or another word for concupiscence, is passion. What do you mean by concupiscence? It is an antique term, concupiscence. And I can explain like this. In the beginning of the class, when we speak about the will, the moral appetency, the appetite, that is called the will, we said there are three types of appetites in a human person. The appetites in the vegetative level, sensus level, and rational level. The sensus level appetites are called concupiscence. That means the desire for bodily pleasures, the bodily needs. So there is always the desire or an appetite for the bodily needs of my life. So food is a sensus level of appetite. Drinks is a sensus level of appetite. I need it for my sustenance. So in itself, these things are a must. If I am not hungry enough and I have no hunger, I have to consult a doctor. Otherwise, I will not eat and I will die. So these are the physical thing which is given in our life, and these things are a must in our life. But in moral matters, sometimes more than the rational will, this appetite will take control, then it will become a moral block. It will become a moral block. Desire for food is needed. But when these desires are become a compulsion in my life, then I will call it gluttony. It's a sin. Gluttony is a sin. Craving for food, and I am living for food alone. Or to possess the worldly things. The worldly things are needed in my life, but I am trying to over enjoying it. Then it will become a craze to accumulate things. And it is something against morality. So this concupiscence and passion, it will be always affecting me negatively in my moral character. So if I am knowing that, then it will be easy for me to come out of it. The craze, the passion, etc. So we have to know that if I am addicted to something, then it is impossible for me to have a normal life. Nowadays, our people are addicted with the mobile phone and certain games. The mobile games. And many of their responsibility will be lacking because they are fully indulging in that. There we can say it is concupiscence or passion. So how it is affecting a person? It may affect a person in two ways. Antecedent or consequent. A passion can affect a person antecedent or consequent. What do you mean by antecedent? As in the case of ignorance, we said something coming before. So before an action, a person is filled with the passion or concupiscence, and he is fully controlled with that, and with that he is entering into the action and performing that action. There his will is not at all having any control over his action because he was emotional. It's an emotional excitement. Excitement that is called concupiscence and passion. An emotional excitement attached with. For example, we can say in a game, a match, maybe basketball, football or volleyball, anything of that sort. If you are fully engaged in that game and anyhow I have to win this game and we are trying our best to play a genuine game, and in between the opposition party is making use of some kind of illegal things there in order to win over, then without my control I may react. If I find that the referee is siding one team and we are the good team and we are performing the best way we can and we are trying to achieve that game, in that moment, the crucial moments, the referee is siding the opposite team purposefully, then I may be raged with anger and I may even attack the referee, and we know that it is against the law. It's against the law. My team will be disqualified. The wordings of the referee will be the final. Everything I know, but that time I may not have the control and I may do something. Remember one of the World Cup, our Zinedine Zidane, he attacked the Italian player. There was enough and ample reason for that. But he was disqualified with a red card. Why? It was not allowed in the game. But many people were supporting Zinedine Zidane because they said what he did was the correct thing. Okay. But there again, he was under the control of his emotions and there is no freedom for his will and he may not be able to distinguish between what he is doing at all. So that's the thing, an antecedent concupiscence or antecedent passion. So many of the crimes are happening just because of this impediment that is called antecedent concupiscence. There the person may not have the control. But on the other hand, the consequent concupiscence means how it is affecting the person at the moment of his activity. He is fully free, but he feels that now with this freedom I cannot perform this activity. He wanted to be under passion or rage or concupiscence or emotions, then to act. In a game, maybe the opposite team, they are physically very powerful and we are afraid of making a noise and we are just came out. But after that we think that, okay, what a shame upon us. And such atrocities happened and they were just manipulating things. We were not even open our mouth and say because it is their place and all the people were supporting them. If we say anything, we cannot come back with the full body. So we were afraid and we came back. But what a shame upon us. So we have to teach them a lesson. So in order to teach them a lesson, they try to fill their heart and mind with emotions and maybe drinking or taking something, and with that courage they are going and attacking. The will was not at all under the control of concupiscence in the beginning, but what happened? They wanted to have these emotions, passions, rage and anger, then they are going and doing something. There again it is called consequent passions or consequent concupiscence. So therefore, the immutability concerned, the moral responsibility concerned, a person is not responsible if it is antecedent because he has no control over his will, but he is fully responsible if it is a consequent concupiscence. That's the second category. The third category is called fear. What do you mean by fear? In moral matters especially, a person shrinks from an impending evil considering that it is very difficult or rather impossible to conquer it. Once again, a moral fear means a person shrinks from the impending evil considering that it is rather difficult or impossible to conquer. We all experience fear in our life, isn't it? There may not be anybody without a fear. Either fear of the night, fear of snake, fear of ferocious animals, dogs, or even cockroaches, fear of exams, fear of superiors, fear of authorities, fear of sicknesses, fear of death. So many types of fears are there. But here we are speaking about the moral fear. That means the fear we have which will affect negatively our moral responsibility or moral performing of particular activities. So it is a person's mind shrinks in front of an impending evil. That means something evil is coming in front of me and I don't know what to do there. So it's a fear, as it is called. And I consider it is very difficult or rather impossible to avoid it. So such things are called fear. And the fear may affect me in an antecedent way or concomitant way. That means it may come before the action or with the action, the fear. Example, self-defense. Self-defense. Why a person is attacking another one for self-defense? Afraid that the person coming against me is going to take my life, therefore I have to defend me, and the better way of defending myself is to attack the other one. It is called self-defense. And while I defend myself, that person may die, the other one may die. So there am I responsible? The question. Why our soldiers fighting against or defending our country, and especially in Kashmir, there may be always shooting between the terrorists and the military. Why? Why to shoot? Because we are afraid that they may attack us. It's a fear. So in order to protect ourselves and our country, we have to defend our country. So whenever they attack, we have to counter attack, or we have to make them not to attack us. That means a fear, it is an antecedent. So before the action itself, we are under the fear and we do it. Or the fear may be concomitant. That means I was not actually prepared enough or actually afraid of anything, but in a sudden moment, just react out of fear, something, an immediate activity, immediate action. So morally speaking, there also I am not responsible when the fear is either antecedent or concomitant. And there are various kinds of fears. From the standpoint of the quality or the quantity of the fear can be grave or slight. Certain fears are grave fear. That means by itself it is something very strong. I have to be afraid of it. I have to be afraid of it. If there is a poisonous snake in front of me and I cannot avoid it, it's a grave fear. Yes. On the other hand, there may be a cockroach in front of me. I need not be worried about it. It's only a slight fear. So the fear can be grave or slight. And if it is a grave fear, and there I perform an activity under the control of fear, I am not responsible. But if it is a slight fear, then I am responsible. Example, while going to the job or the class, in between, the same thing happened. That means on the corridor or on the way, there is a cobra, a very poisonous snake. And I have no way to go, overcome it. I retreat. And I am going back and I decide, okay, today I cannot go for work or for my class. There is a sufficient reason because it's a grave fear. On the other hand, if when I am going, in between the road there is a cockroach, then I decide, oh my God, this cockroach, it may attack me. So today I decide not to go for my work. No, there is no justification for that. So this is only a slight fear. So this is the difference between a grave fear and a slight fear. Then also the fear can from outside or from within my heart. It may be a psychological thing or there is something outside. And many a times this inside fear, the psychological fear is more grave than the outside fear. Certain students try to copy in the exam. Why? Because they are afraid of the exam and they are afraid of the reaction that may come after if I fail. And they are terribly afraid of it. So therefore, they will not be able to function normally because of this kind of inside fear, the psychological aspect of fear. On the other hand, there are external fear and it is easy to remove the external fear, but internal fear, it is very difficult to remove it in our life. So many a times when we judge other people, we have to make this point, this fear, whether it's a slight fear or whether it is a grave fear, whether it is a real fear or whether it is a psychological thing, and we have to evaluate accordingly. Therefore, this is something very, very important in our day-to-day life. The fourth transitory impediment is violence. What do you mean by violence? It is not all kinds of violence we are referring here, only the moral violence. Moral violence is, we can define like this. It's a physical force applied to a resisting person by an external agent. So, three things are there. It must be a physical force, no moral force or no psychological force, nothing of that sort. Here we are referring only a physical force. Then again, it should be applied to a resisting subject. That means a person never wanted to be under the violence. He is a resisting subject, and finally it must be by an external agent. So it is not a violence inside of a person. It is not a psychological factor, but it is a physical factor, and there must be a resisting subject, and there must be a person, the cause of violence, the external agent. When these three things are coming together, then we can say it is a moral violence and it is affecting negatively our moral character. Why? It must be a physical force first of all. I said not all kinds of violences are coming under moral violence. And it must be to a resisting person. Sometimes it can happen that in the beginning that person may be resisting it, but after some times the person may start cooperating with this violence. In such a case, we cannot say that it is violence and the activity happened is under the control of violence. No, we cannot. Then finally, it must be from an external agent. And morality concerned, so far as the affected person is resisting against the violence, he is not responsible. But when the moment that person also cooperating with this violence, that person is responsible. Example, you might have heard the Stockholm syndrome. It's a psychological term. It was about a notorious bank robbery happened in Stockholm. The robbers entered into the bank and made some staff, lady staff, as hostages, and after some times when the police came and in order to rescue this lady staff and to arrest those robbers, these were the lady staff helped the robbers to escape because they become just like obedient servants like. It may happen in our day-to-day life also. In a family where the husband a drunkard, the beginning the wife and children may resist it by all hands, but after some times when they feel that their resistance will not work, then they may not mind it or just cooperators in that. And in moral violence, this may happen. And another example, a case of rape, where the victim at the beginning resisting herself, but after some times she may start cooperating with it. So this is the thing we have to understand in violence. So the responsibility concerned, till the moment a person is resisting, that person is not responsible. But when the moment a person starts giving consent, from that moment onwards, that person is responsible. May not be fully, but there is personal responsibility there. So when we judge an activity of a particular person, we have to see whether it is because of the violence and how far that person is responsible for that violence, responding to that violence positively. So these are the things regarding transitory impediments. Now we move to permanent impediments. And we know the permanent impediments as the nature we have already said. It is more or less permanent. It is very difficult to remove, and again it will affect the totality of my moral character. When I say it is more or less permanent, if it is permanent throughout, it is called absolutely permanent. If it is only for a time being, it is relatively permanent. So, under this category, there are three types of moral impediments. They are infancy, idiocy and moronism, the first category. Second category, propensities and habits. And the third category, mental diseases. So, let us go to the first category, infancy, idiocy and moronism. What do you mean by infancy? An infant, a child. Morally speaking, a child is not a person capable enough to make a moral judgment. And a person not capable enough not make all the moral knowledge. Therefore, that period of infancy, we cannot judge a person morally because he or she is a child. And in everybody's human life, this passage is there, the passage of infancy. There, a person cannot be judged morally. So, that is called, it is a relatively permanent impediment. The second in this category is called idiocy. And we used to call certain people idiots. A person not very prompt enough to understand things and respond to things. Such a people are called idiot. But it is an inhuman term, we cannot use it. But it's a state of mind. It is a state of mind just because of the abnormal development of our brain. It may happen. The abnormal development of a brain, a person become like an idiot because there will not be any capacity to understand, comprehend things. Such a people, by birth it is happening and there is no way out and there may not be treatment also. Therefore, we cannot say that such kind of people are morally responsible. So, this is also a fact in our human life. Then third, moronism. It is little bit different than idiocy. Idiocy means it is the abnormal development of the brain, but moronism means it's the it's an arrested mental development. Arrested mental development. That means in the childhood phase, when a person is at a certain age, maybe 6, 7 or 8 or like that, in a particular moment because of some certain diseases or anything, the development of the brain stop. But the physical development will be there. Externally looking, that person is just like an ordinary person. But his mental development is very less and mentally he or she is a child, but physically he or she is an adult. There, the moral responsibility then, so far that mental development was there, only that much. Therefore, it also considered as a permanent impediment. These are the first category, infancy, idiocy and moronism. But more than this, what is more important is the second category. They are the propensities and habits. What do you mean by a propensity? A particular way of behavior in a person. A particular way of behavior in a person. For example, certain people we can find always angry, anger at the tip of the nose, and the unapproachable persons, we are not able to just go for good or bad. Such people may immediately react. And why they are doing that? We don't know. It is their character and it is happening just because of the particular nature of their nervous system. So, it is something inherited. It is by birth a person is having. Another category of people, melancholic people. That means always sad. Even in the moment of big celebration, everybody rejoicing and dancing and singing. But we can find at least a few people sitting in the corner just sad. Very sad. And their approach, their mentality, everything. And we may think, what kind of people they are? Why they can at least smile? No, it is impossible for them because it is because of this kind of nerve development, or it is something inherited. It cannot be changed. So, when a person is behaving in his moral attitude because of these propensities, because of this particular behavioral system. We have to understand this. So we have to be very kind about judging such kind of people. We should not be harsh enough. And again, how far those people are responsible for this? Normally they are not unaware that they have this problem. That's the thing. So when they are unaware of this problem, they are not at all responsible. But sometimes because of the contact with other people, and when they are aware that I have this problem, and the moment in which they are aware, from that moment onwards, they are responsible. Otherwise, they are not. So the second thing in this habits, when we speak about propensities, we said it is inherited by birth. But a habit is not something by birth, but it is something acquired by constant repetition of a particular act in a particular way. Constant repetition of a particular act in a particular way, we become addicted to that particular act. Such things are called habits. And here we mean only evil habits, not good habits. Good habits are the virtues we have to make in our life, but evil habits we have to try to avoid it. For example, the habit of smoking. We all know that it is something bad. Habit of excess drinking. We know it is something bad. Or habit of masturbation, telling lies, stealing. All these things are evil habits, and these things are happening not by birth, but it is by constant repetition of such a kind of activity we become addicted. And when we are addicted to this, our mental framework is not free enough to comprehend the moral responsibility. Therefore, under these particular habits, how far a person is responsible, this is a question. So the following principles we have to observe there in our judgment regarding these habits. First thing, how this habit being acquired, the habit as such. For example, the habit of smoking, or habit of drinking, or habit of telling lies, etc. How we acquired it, that's the first question, and are we responsible there? Second, a particular activity within this habit, that means after this class I am going and smoking. I have the habit of smoking, that's a habit as such, and in that habit itself, now after the class I have to smoke, I am compelled to smoke, and I am going and smoking. So whether I am responsible for that or not. So let us take the first, the habit itself. How I acquire that habit, that's the first question. Two ways a person can acquire a habit. The first one, voluntarily acquiring it. Second one, involuntarily acquiring it. Voluntary means knowingly and willingly a person become under a prey to the habit. It is a habit voluntarily acquired. Involuntarily means not knowing all the effects of this habit, but unfortunately by practice I become a victim to that habit. It is called involuntarily acquired habit. Example, we can say smoking or drug addiction, or addicted to the modern gadgets, mobiles, the video games, such things. When a person is being addicted, sometimes it can happen that they are drug addict, maybe in the college, and it is a age to know, distinguish between what is good and evil. Even then, joining with the friends and knowing that I may become addicted to this, but I want to experiment it and I want to follow it. Finally, that person fully addicted to ganja or any other stuff. We have to say he is fully responsible for that habit, because he has the age to distinguish between good and evil. Even then, knowing that it is something evil, and knowing that if I am under this habit, this will be my life, and knowing everything, if that person is going and having it, that person is fully responsible in moral terms. But unfortunately, sometimes the opposite may happen. I may be cheated by my friends. not knowing that it is something intoxicating. Maybe they may say it is only a juice. You can try it. But it may be mixed with liquor. And when I continue to take it, finally I become an addict, a drunkard. And many of our poor children are just because of this victims, not knowing what's it. And the mafia may be making use of them. So in their case, we cannot say that they are fully responsible for that because it is an involuntary thing. If they are knowing that it is something bad, and if they are knowing that it is these things they are applying in my life, they will resist it. But unfortunately, they are not knowing it and become a victim to that. The habit is acquired involuntarily. In such a case, that person is not at all responsible. That's the habit itself.